one tip when you're weighing your flour, and I think it's important, especially when you're baking and making pastry, you don't want too much, you don't want more flour than you're thinking you're getting. So I just want to show you and remind some of you that when you're measuring your flour, you're going to want to scoop it into your dry measure, and don't shake, but just level it off. And you're going to want to just use a flat surface. So if you're using a table knife, make sure you use the flat side. You're going to get the proper amount of flour when you do it this way, because shaking is going to pack it in, and sometimes you can end up with several tablespoons more per cup than you expect. So it's a really important little tip. Okay, so what I've done is I have my in my blender. So if you have the cooking blender, it does a good job of this. A food processor also does, and so does a pastry blender by hand. So whatever you have, you can also use 2 knives if you want to. This is just so simple and consistent that I love using it because it makes it super easy. I did have a customer who tried using a Vitamix and it did not work the same way. So just a tip for you, because I don't want you to not have success. All right, so I just weighed my butter. It's cold right out of the fridge. And the brand I use, because that's important as well, is not a particularly expensive brand. It's the Natural from Costco. And the one I'm using is salted. So there are lots of little variations in butter as well. And so buying the very cheapest butter is not your friend. It has a larger proportion of water in it and less fat. And so it again, it changes how your results turn out. So I'm not here to say that you need to buy the best. If you want to, go ahead. I don't on a normal basis, and I find that I have consistent results. Okay, so what I want to do before I get talking too much is just cut this into small chunks so it's ready to drop in. And I love using the crinkle cutter because it really doesn't stick to the blade, and I'm not constantly scraping it off. So this is a great use. If you have the crinkle cutter, it's a great use. So now I have my cold butter right from the fridge, all in little chunks. I have my ice water ready, and I have a separate measuring cup because today I'm going to measure. I don't normally, but I'm going to measure today so that I can give you accurate results. Okay, so what's going to happen, I'm going to turn the blender on. Let's just tilt this a little bit. I'll turn it to face you. It's going to be a little awkward for me. Close the lid, and I'm just going to press the center button. You see it's speed 1. I'm not using the presets, and I'm just going to press it to start. So what it's doing is it's mixing my flour, sugar, and salt right here. I'm going to turn it up a little bit. So I see I have sugar right here. Yeah, you just want it to get fully mixed. There we go. So I'm going to turn it back down to speed number 1. And now is when I'm going to start dropping the chunks of butter in. And you can see that it's like chunking away here. I'm doing them one at a time, and it's going to poof a little bit of flour up at me, and I don't want that, so I'm just kind of keeping it covered. And it's just basically blending it in here, and as soon as I have it all in, I want to work fairly quickly. I'm going to stop, and that's it. And as soon as it's nice and even and you don't hear any chunking, let's just check and make sure that we have it all cut in. If we go too long, the friction is going to soften the butter and it's not going to stay hard. So we don't want that. It's very short work. It's nice and consistent. And I'm going to dump it now into a bowl. Oops, hold on. I had a bowl, but I used it for demoing purposes. I'm going to dump it into the bowl, and you can see that it's crumbly like this, and it's all nice and even. So I'm just going to get this last little bit out of there. And then I'm just gonna wash my blender, but I'm not going to mix the ice water in with it. So, just gonna stir it around, make sure it's all nice and even, and you can see that it's gone a little bit yellower, and it's got nice kind of different sizes of little chunks, but it's quite even. That's what we're looking for. I'm gonna measure my water so that when I quote you the recipe, okay, that's a half cup. Let's see if I end up using all of that. What I found, and if you've struggled making pastry, for me, the struggle was the amount of water and how much I was allowed to stir. So let's just see. That is virtually the whole half cup. It's more than the recipe says, and this was the confusion for me. So what I want you to see here is just by giving it a couple quick stirs, it's quite sticking, like it's still crumbly, but it's kind of in wet crumbles. That's exactly what I want. So I have like less 1 tablespoon. So there we go. Now the last little step on our pie pastry, and it's so easy doing this. I swear to you, it's that easy. That's why I'm leveling the blender for it. Is I'm gonna put this out on my pastry mat. If you don't have a pastry mat, just make sure your counter is really nice and clean. And then make sure your hands are really clean. And your fingernails, okay? So like, that's an important thing. So I know that should go without saying, but it doesn't always, so I'll just say it. We all need to be reminded sometimes. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna basically grab this edges of my pastry mat and squish it together. So you can see it's just about perfect. It's not, and I'm kneading. I'm going kind of opposite directions, and I'm folding it over in half and then folding it over and doing a quick knead so that I'm gonna get a little bit of layers in my dough. And yet what I don't want to do is handle it with my hands and melt that butter or soften the butter too much. I want my butter still to stay nice and hard, firm. Okay, so that's it. That's it. So the pastry in this state is ready to get wrapped up, put in the fridge, and I just wrap it, put it in and roll it up and put it in, tuck it in the fridge and leave it for a good half hour. Okay, and then I'll be back and we'll shape it. Okay, we're gonna do the filling. And so what we're looking for is ripe, but not too ripe fruit, but it's also a good way to use up tired fruit. So if it is a bit aged, that's fine. These look really nice, but I have found in doing them that some of them are a little yucky inside. And so you can see this one's kind of yucky inside. So part of the core is rotten, it broke off. So what I'm gonna do, I'll salvage a little bit of this one and take the core out. I'm not worrying about the skin because the skin kind of just disappears. It's fine if it's rustic as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of the flavor and nutrients are in the skin. So I'm a proponent of leaving them on, besides who wants to peel all those things. So shout out to a good knife. You cannot thank a good knife enough for doing so much of your work for you. I say this often, and it's funny because when you actually go to use your knife, it should actually do, it's a tool that's meant to make your life a lot easier. So if you're having to push and it's frustrating, you cut a tomato and it won't, you need to either sharpen your knife or get a new knife. So I have plenty here, and these are, I'm gonna test. So I'm gonna encourage you also to taste as you go. So these are a bit mealy. So that means to me they're not gonna be super juicy. I'm gonna use less flour than I otherwise would. So, but again, when you cook, it's a good way to use mealy fruit, honestly. So I have a 1/4 cup here, and I have a lot. I'm making a large 15-inch. Well, it's starting as a 15-inch. But I actually go by sight, and then I taste it as I go. So 1/4 cup looks good. I'm gonna put, I had a 1/3 of a cup. I don't think I need that much. So I'm gonna go with half of that. And secret ingredient, salt. Whenever you make something sweet like this, if you add some salt, I'm doing a 1/4 teaspoon. I might do a half. You aren't going to taste the salt, and it's a healthy salt, not a table salt. What you're going to find is it doesn't taste as sweet, but it tastes really good. So it kind of balances out the sweetness. And I'm not going to measure my vanilla, and I'm using Pure vanilla. This one is from Costco. It's a good way to buy it. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. That's probably a tablespoon of vanilla. All right. The other thing here's, well, we're gonna go and taste. So we're just gonna fold this gently so that I'm mixing it all in. I want to coat the flour on top of the fruit. So what we're aiming for is, and because your fruit will always change from one, time you make it to the next, it's really hard to be really strict about how much thickening or flour that you put in it. And depending, if you change it up and do a different fruit, really test based on the juiciness of the fruit, which is why you need to taste it. Okay, I'm gonna test this. Doesn't taste very good yet. Okay, so this, I'm gonna end up putting more sugar in because it's not sweet. So I have another couple tablespoons there, and I'm gonna add 2 things. I'm gonna add some coriander seed. Now this is completely optional. You might like to add, so pears have a really kind of warm, buttery kind of a flavor. They're not acidic like an apple. And so you can add some acidity. So that's the second ingredient I'm gonna add, which is lemon juice. Again, it's optional, so taste it. Don't be afraid to wing this, okay? This is what's gonna make, you go, oh my word, it was so good. It's because you tasted it and adjusted based on what you're getting. So I'm gonna add a little bit of coriander seed because I like coriander seed. This is what it looks like. I ground this myself in the blender. It's really potent, it's quite lemony. And you can see that I'm sprinkling and by like tapping the side of my spoon so I don't get a huge chunk in any one spot. Another way to do that would be to mix it with your flour and sugar first so that it's even and you don't get it all in one spot. And I don't have lemon ready, so I'm gonna have to pause the recording here. We're gonna taste though. So I added another 2 tablespoons of sugar. It still needs some acid. And one of the things you're gonna learn as you taste the difference is that often a recipe needs acid. It's a secret ingredient to cooking and baking. So I'm gonna take a pause here. I'm gonna go get some lemon from my fridge, and I'm going to ream it, and I'll come back and you'll see. All right, so my lemon, get that done, get all that juice out of there. An average lemon, and when you buy them, choose them, they're really heavy, and the smoother you can get them, the better. All emptied out. 1 lemon is usually about 4 tablespoons, which is the same as a 1/4 cup. So let me just kind of measure here. So there's 1 tablespoon. I'm gonna just start with 2 because this is pretty flat. These pears were on sale, and I think I know why. They're not that tasty. They're not really juicy like you like pears. And again, back to the seasoning, you know, most people like cinnamon, so if you like just a little bit of cinnamon with this, then go for it. That's brighter. Okay, I'm gonna go back to like a full, the rest of that, so that's 2. So that's gonna be a half a cup of sugar, again, just because these aren't terribly great. But I have some nice flavor there from the vanilla. I think, let me taste here. So we have some nice juices coming along. I think in the end, excuse me, I'm gonna put more lemon because it's brightening it up. Okay, I'm gonna put okay, so there's 4 tablespoons. There's a little bit there left over. All right, I'm gonna taste this again. You can see that the juice, there's juiciness coming out of there. There's just a little puddle in the bottom. So my flour may or may not be enough. I think I'm gonna add some cinnamon. Hold on. You know what I think I'm gonna add actually? This smells so good. So this was, you can just adjust depending. Normally that would be enough. This is actually chai tea spice. So it's got a bunch of things in here, including cinnamon. It just smells so good. There we go. There's never 2 that taste the same in our house, but you know what? If you go to a really high-end restaurant or a, yeah, like a farm to market kind of thing experience, this is what they're doing. Everyone's different. It is not cookie cutter, and that's a sign of a really good cook. So here we go. The lemon was super necessary. I'm gonna put all of that in there just cause. But I don't want it to be glommy, but here's the thing. You want like a little puddling of juice in your galette or your pie, whichever you decide to make. You don't want a lake, nor do you want it to be stodgy and really thick and glommy. So that's the balance we're looking for. And again, until you work with the fruit, you don't really know what it needs. So we are gonna, that's our best guess. All right, so now we'll get to the shaping of it. But for now, that's what our filling looks like. All right, we are gonna put this galette together. So I just pulled this out of the fridge. I grabbed a bench scraper and a thingy. I have a rolling pin, and here's my cold batter that's been in there for almost an hour. So what's kind of interesting is if you can see, I'm squishing it, and it's not perfectly hard. It's actually, I'm able to squish it, but it's cold. So if it's really, really hard, you're gonna need to give it a minute to soften up. Oh yeah, and we have our powdered sugar shaker, but it has flour in it. You see this gets well used. And I'm going to use this stiffer bench scraper here to gather up all the bits of flour off my mat before I put, butter. Before I put the flour down, I want a really nice little light dusting. Put that down, and we're going to dust the other side. Don't want to lose anything, so we'll just add this to the side. Or it's just gonna stick to me. All right, so what we're gonna do is shape this a little bit because we want it to be round. So we're gonna start with it somewhat round. Okay, and I'm gonna start in the middle. You can see just the weight of this leaves a dent in it. So I don't need to push super hard here, but I'm going to brush off the excess, turn it 90 degrees so that each time I go from the middle up and the middle back, I'm pushing gently. I don't know if you can see, I'm applying a little bit of pressure from my shoulders down. I don't want to go back and forth because what I'm going to do is really develop the gluten, which will make it tough. And we want to have a tender pie crust that you don't have to use a knife to cut. You want to be able to just cut it with the side of your fork. All right. Just why we're also taking any excess flour off, but we don't want it to stick because it can't roll out. So here I go. I'm going to go in opposite directions and turn it myself. And then I'm just going to kind of go each way, and I'm aiming. I want it to be able to continuously move. So once it right there, it didn't move. So it means it's a bit stuck on the other side. So I'm going to give it a little dusting. And this takes practice. So don't stress, but this is also where a few good tools are going to make your life a lot easier. So very fine dusting of flour is a good thing. Now this is still too thick. There, it's a little bit stuck and I don't want that. So, which is why we put a little dusting on the other side and we're gonna go again. So that little fine dusting is enough to keep it from sticking, which will allow it to keep spreading out. So again, middle, one direction, middle, the opposite direction. So you see I'm going off of the, like I'm running out of space. And this is 1.5 times the recipe for scratch pie crust. And I'm going from the middle. Here's a tendency is we want it to be bigger, so we just work the edge. And then what we end up with is a thick in the center and then a really thin edge. We want it to be about as consistent as we can. And so if you feel it, you can feel where it's thick, and you should be able to see, you can see the light comes through there, but it's not super thin. Here's a little thick edge right here. There's a thick edge over there. There's a few, you can feel. So trust your fingers. Work with some space. And try and get it as consistent as you can. So all the spots that are a bit thick, thin them out. Okay, so I'm just gonna move this forward. You can see that it drapes really nicely. Now, if yours is tearing or if it's, you can't tell that it's buttery, then it might not have been mixed as finely as possible. Remember that this is meant to be, to stop it from rolling off of, as well, it's a, it's a bench scraper built in. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, I have it all nice and you can see just how beautifully it drapes. That's a sign of a really nice dough, if I do say so myself. What I'm gonna do is aim to put this on here so that I'm kinda gonna be centered. And I want it to overhang. And you notice that I'm using this new large round stone because it has a deep well. And that is going to just be a little bit of insurance. If you can use something like this, or just use a large sheet pan, a pizza pan, a bar pan, anything that has little sides, and we'll hold it all. Okay, here we go. This is what, so you, I don't know if you can see, this has got really juicy. So I'm gonna scoop this out. So I'm gonna put the fruit only. This has really gotten juicy. It's making me a little nervous. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a little bit more flour in that juice, adjust so that now my oven wants to be preheated. I realize mine is not, so that's not a good thing. Mine doesn't take long, thankfully. Let's just see. So what I'm wanting to do here is not go quite to the edge, but I want to have this, you know, thickish puddle, because this is actually going to be my dessert, this middle part. And I'm going to try and make it sort of the same depth all the way around. This, I'm using this small mix-in scraper, which is like a spoonula sort of, and it is really good for this kind of thing. So that's how much juice, and it's quite thick, so I'm not gonna fret about it because I do have sides, so if it ends up a little bit juicier than I'd like, it won't be the end of the world. Now, important, because I'm using stone, if you're using any kind of a really thick pan, which I do recommend, then you're gonna want to make sure you have lots of heat from underneath, because otherwise it's not gonna brown underneath and you're gonna end up with a soggy crust. So I'm actually going to bake this at 400. I wouldn't normally, but with this juiciness, I don't want to take a chance. So here we go. Yeah, I need lots of good heat from the bottom. So all I'm gonna do is, you can see that I'm kind of telling it where to go with one hand and lifting the next section and just kind of pleating it as we go around. This does not have to be perfect. This is not an exact science. But just, you know, you want to contain the juice and make this nice free-form pie. And there we have it. So it's open in the middle. It's got edges. When it cooks down, it's gonna thicken. It's gonna go thinner. It's not gonna be as high. And the fruit hopefully will, like the juices will thicken up with that flour as it cooks. I probably will get some leaking, a little bit of leaking of the juice, but my pan is gonna contain it. And I'll cut this in little pie wedge shapes, and it's going to be delicious, I promise you. So while it's waiting for my oven to heat up, I'm gonna pop this in the fridge so that my butter stays, the butter stays nice and cold. So you might want to do that as well. The stone is fine to go from the fridge into the hot oven, and I don't know if there's anything else. It's that easy. I will show you the end product, and I'm going to cook this. Lots of heat from the bottom, because this is lots of wet juice, and I want my crust to be nice and brown on the bottom. So I have my shelf, my oven at the very, very bottom, and this is going to go down there. It is not going to burn, I promise you. Your clay baker stoneware is very, very protective, but that also means that you need lots of nice heat from the underside for this recipe to work really beautifully. And then it's going to get flaky, and once it's all golden brown, I'm going to bring it out, let it cool. Delicious.